This is my very favorite presentation to give. I call it Eat Up, Slim Down, and Get Healthy. I've given it hundreds of times over the past 5 years at medical conferences. Hospitals have hired me to come give this to their staff, their dietitians, and their doctors. I've done it on cruise ships. I've done it at 5-star resorts, and I've done it for individual clients. And I call this Eat Up, Slim Down, and Get Healthy because it tells you exactly what to do according to what all of our speakers said to getting health and also to lose weight. You know, often when I'm giving this talk whereas the largest audience was 2,000 people, and I've given it several times at Kaiser Permanente to several hundred doctors. I often give this talk and I say, is there anyone in this room that wants to lose weight? And with the exception of the time I gave it to only doctors at Kaiser and not a single hand was raised, generally most of the hands go up in the audience. There's always a few that don't. And I say, well, do you know anybody that needs to lose weight? And then of course all the hands go up, because as we know, 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese. And according to Dr. Furman, who was our first expert, that number has been skewed to give people a more favorable BMI, and it's really more like 90%. So if you are one of the 10% of people that is not overweight or obese, good chance is that you have coworkers, friends, families, or loved ones that are. So this information can be very helpful to them. And if you're not overweight, it still can be helpful to you. The reason is the way that I am going to propose that you eat for ultimate weight loss is the same way, and I can say this now with confidence, having listened to all these speakers with you, that all of our speakers say we need to eat just for optimal health, disease prevention, and disease reversal. I'm honored that Dr. Esselstyn actually has asked for some of my slides to use in his presentation to show that we really are all on the same page here. Yes, there may be some minor differences with a few things, but 95 to 99% of what we shared on the summit, we can say with confidence the speakers agree about what is the best way to eat, not just for weight loss, but for optimal health, so that we can prevent these common diseases of lifestyle that plague so many Americans, like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disease, and now we know perhaps even cancer. So why am I so confident about this? Well, as you'll hear a little bit later in my story, I have been overweight or obese most of my life. Unfortunately, I can't share with you pictures like the way so many of these famous YouTubers do, because I had no idea this was going to be my profession. And I didn't document my journey because, let's face it, when you're 200 pounds, you really don't feel like getting into a bikini and having somebody take your picture. But worse than that, I lived in Sherman Oaks, California during the 1994 Northridge earthquake. I was 5 miles from the epicenter, and all of my photos taken before that age were destroyed because a water pipe broke and my building was red tagged. So I don't really have photos of myself overweight or obese. I mean, you can talk to people that know me. You could look at medical records that exist to show that I'm not lying about my weight. And I do have a pair of shorts that when I give this talk in person, I hold up. You can see in a photo coming up, Scooby-Doo shorts that are huge on me. And I've done some videos where I'm actually wearing those. But a picture I do have that happened after the earthquake, on the left, what you're looking at, is me weighing 165 pounds. I'm 5'6" tall, by the way. And I first became fat at the age of 5, but by the age of 11, when I weighed 160 pounds, I was not yet 5 feet tall. That was 1970, and I was considered obese for my age. And I'll have lots of stories to share with you about how humiliating that was, being the only fat kid in every grade until college. So the picture on the left was taken in 2003 when I was 43 years old and weighed 165 pounds. I'm wearing a brown shirt, and I'm standing next to an 800-pound brown cow, and the cow is on the left. The picture on the right was taken in 2013 when I was 53 years old and weighed 127 pounds. I am now, as you know from watching the summit or listening, 2 days ago I turned 59, and I weigh between 115 and 117 pounds, a weight that I have now been able to easily maintain for 5 years without counting calories, carbs, points, weighing my food on a plate, or even weighing myself, but doing, as all the speakers say, eating the right food. I can distill the secret to ultimate weight loss into 2 words: Unlike what most people think, those words are not eat less, they're not exercise more, and they're certainly not gastric bypass. Not bypass. I'm sorry, guys, I'm really tired. Bypass, but that is funny. Gastric bypass. That's what you'll get if you adopt these secrets. Is your pants will shrink naturally. So the secret to ultimate weight loss is calorie density. And what calorie density simply means is calories per pound of food. So if you live somewhere outside of the United States, I know you have different measurements than pounds. I believe it's liters or grams. But the idea is calorie density simply means the amount of calories for a given weight of food. And calorie density is not counting calories. I assure you that if you understand the principles of calorie density, you're not required to memorize how many calories in a half a cup of rice or in a cup of blueberries. You simply need to know what we call the average calorie density of a few major food groups. And you're going to learn that food varies in caloric density from 100 calories per pound to 4,000 calories per pound, which means that there is a 40-fold difference in the caloric density of food. This is the concept of the magical buffet that Dr. Steve Lewenda was referring to, and that Dr. Shintani also talked about in his presentation, and that Dr. Dean Ornish wrote a best-selling book about called Eat More, Weigh Less. And when you understand caloric density, it is possible to consume twice as much food by weight and yet take in half as many calories. As I mentioned, so many of the speakers understand and teach caloric density and even wrote best-selling books about them. Dr. Shintani wrote The Peace Diet. As I just mentioned, Dr. Dean Ornish wrote a best-selling book, I believe it was 1985, called Eat More, Weigh Less. And Dr. McDougall, about 10 years later, wrote another fabulous best-selling book called The McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss, which is based on the principles of caloric density. Our wonderful speaker, Dr. Linda Carney, teaches the Starch Smart solution, again, based on caloric density. And Dr. Tom Campbell and Dr. Michelle McMacken, who actually run weight loss clinics in New York, use this principle of caloric density for their patients. Even though I had the books by Dr. Ornish and Dr. McDougall on my shelf, I honestly hadn't read them. And so that's just a takeaway right now. Buying this summit is not going to help you if you don't watch or listen to it. I had not read those books. I have read them since. But what really helped me understand caloric density was the book that I'm showing you right now by Dr. Barbara Rolls. I actually picked it up one Friday night after going to a movie in Burbank, California at a dollar bookstore. I got it for $1. And what really helped me is that I tend to learn things better when I can see them. I'm a very visual learner. And Dr. Rolls, who is the person, by the way, who has done more research into the field of calorie density than any other human alive, she actually not only has published research on it, but has a laboratory at Penn State University where she studies human eating behavior, and was the only speaker that I could not get for this summit because she broke her arm. I'm hoping to get an interview with her. I did an audio interview with her years ago. She wrote this book, and it really helped me understand, because when I saw the photos, for example, the one on the book, you could have a huge bowl of a minestrone type soup or maybe 2 bites of a cheeseburger. It really helped me understand the teachings of Dr. Ornish and Dr. McDougall. For example, she had a photo in her book, or a visual depiction, that for the same amount of calories in a mere 1/4 cup of raisins, I could have 2 cups of grapes. And when you take grapes and freeze them and eat them slowly, they taste like sorbet. So her book really helped me understand these concepts. You see, one of the things Dr. Rolls discovered, and Dr. Lyle brought home yesterday in his talk, was that all human beings that she studied, and she studied people from all over the world, that all human beings eat roughly the same amount of food per day by weight. And that number, as Dr. Lyle said, was about 3 to 5 pounds. Now, this will vary, of course, because if you're a 4'10" female, you're probably not going to eat as much as a 6'6" male basketball player. I mean, I don't eat as much as Patrick Barboubian, who is the strongest man alive, who happens to be vegan. But that said, in order to feel full, to experience what is called satiation, that feeling of nice, comfortable fullness that tells us to stop eating, we need to eat a certain amount of food every day. And that number is about 3 to 5 pounds. That's why these weighing and measuring programs, they do work, by the way. But for most people, to weigh and measure and portion control your food on a plate for the rest of your life, it's not going to be sustainable for most people. And the problem with those programs is they permit you so few calories that while, yes, you do lose weight quickly, just like you will on the dangerous keto diet, your hunger returns so much quickly because of the dysregulation of the hormones ghrelin and leptin that almost everyone I've ever met that does these weighing and measuring programs ends up not only gaining their weight back more quickly than they lost it, but then some. And when you understand calorie density, you can throw out both the food scale and the one you step on, because you're going to learn that the way to lose weight is with a full plate. Now, Dr. Rolls also discovered that this feeling of fullness that we call satiety is not simply based on the calorie content of the food. I mean, if this was true, we could just eat 3 Snicker bars a day for 1,200 calories and lose weight. We wouldn't feel full. We wouldn't be healthy. But what Dr. Rolls discovered is that fullness is not just based on the calories, but by the weight and the volume of the food. And the foods that we're going to ask you to eat for optimal health and ultimate weight loss are the most filling and voluminous foods on the planet, and you're going to learn why shortly. She also discovered that when you have water in the food, that allows you to feel fuller on fewer calories. Now, don't think that you can just drink a bunch of water and that's the answer and then not eat because you'll feel full. Because it's true that initially water will make you feel full if you drink it, but it has no calories and it exits the digestive tract too quickly. However, when water is bound to the food, for example, like in a soup made of vegetables, or when water is in food like fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes that you have to cook with water, the water adds weight. But it doesn't add calories, yet it allows you to feel full on fewer calories. So what we're going to do now is we are going to create a calorie density chart together. The foods that are going to appear in green, these are the healthiest foods on the planet. The foods that are appearing in red, in my opinion, are the most unhealthful foods, if you can even call them that, on the planet, and in my opinion, should not be eaten for weight loss or for health. The foods that appear in green, these are healthful foods. Purple are healthful foods. Purple is my favorite color, but these are very calorically dense. So these are foods you might want to be mindful of if you're struggling with your weight. Now realize we're not going to go over individual foods here because then that would be like having to memorize the calories in a whole bunch of foods. We're just going to go over a few major food groups, and that's all you really need to know. So we're going to start with the food group on the left, the most calorically dilute food group. That's 100 calories per pound. And when I do this lecture in front of an audience, I ask people, what do you think that is? And most people get it right. They say things like kale, lettuce, exactly. But it's actually all non-starchy vegetables. So that's pretty much every vegetble except for corn, which is technically a grain, and potatoes, which are technically tubers, still very healthy, but of a higher caloric density. You know, there's a few vegetables like parsnips that are starchy vegetables, but for the most part, that is almost every single vegetable you can imagine in this group. So if you look at this list, if you were to Google non-starchy vegetables, you would probably come up with a different vegetable every single day. So you literally could eat a different vegetable every day without repeating. Now, there's actually some foods that are classified as non-starchy vegetables, but botanically they're fruits. Things like cucumber, tomato, eggplant, okra, bell pepper, and zucchini. I say these because while botanically fruits, we classify them as non-starchy vegetables, and they have a caloric density even lower than 100 calories a pound. These are about 67 calories per pound. So after caloric density, the next secret to ultimate weight loss is to eat more vegetables. You want to do what Dr. Tom Campbell said and make sure that every plate of food you eat is at least half full of non-starchy vegetable, and that your second serving is still half non-starchy vegetable, and that every serving of food you eat all day is half non-starchy vegetables. The truth is, at averaging about 100 calories a pound, it is virtually impossible to overeat on non-starchy vegetables. You pretty much burn up more calories in the chewing and digesting of these foods than you would in absorbing their calories. Because what are non-starchy vegetables? Primarily fiber, water, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, and micronutrients. Now the problem is, and you notice that this correlates with weight, is that most Americans eat very few vegetables. Americans eat over 92% of their calories from animal products and processed food, and most eat less than 10% from vegetables. And the vegetable that most Americans eat is the potato, which is great, but the way they eat it, which is French fried in sugar, fat, and salt, or as potato chips, you take a food that's about 400 calories per pound and you turn it into a food-like substance that is now high fat, high sugar, high salt, that has 2,500 calories a pound. When it comes to eating the healthful things like greens, which Dr. Esselstyn suggests, something like less than 3% of Americans actually eat greens or non-starchy vegetables other than potatoes every day. It's gotten so bad that our Congress has now said that French fries are a vegetable and pizza is a vegetable because of the small amount of tomato sauce that is on the pizza. You know, they did a study at Tufts University, and they discovered that the people that eat the most fruits and vegetables, particularly vegetables, consistently have the lowest body weight and BMI. And like Dr. Goldhammer said, it is impossible to sustain obesity if you eat enough vegetables, or show me an overweight person and I'll show you someone unwilling to eat enough raw vegetables and steamed vegetables. This is the ticket to not only optimal health, but weight loss, because these foods that are so low in caloric density are the foods that are most linked to the prevention of diseases like Alzheimer's, greens, for example, and all your diseases like cardiovascular disease. And some would say even cancer. So why don't Americans eat vegetables? Well, the truth is we develop taste preferences for what we habitually eat. And believe it or not, the only taste preference that's inherent in the human being is breast milk. Everything else is learned. And the reason we don't like vegetables mainly is because we don't eat them. The more you eat them, the more you will like them. And eventually you'll get to the point where you'll crave them. If you're familiar with my story, which I'll share a little bit after this presentation, I did not eat a single fruit or vegetable, and I'm not kidding, until I was 43 years old, which is how I ended up bleeding internally from a colon riddled with precancerous polyps and weighing 200 pounds. People would joke that I was the only vegetarian that didn't eat fruits and vegetables. I thought Skittles were a fruit. So I went from having a Coke Slurpee for breakfast with 8 pumps of vanilla syrup to having greens for breakfast, and now I can't imagine any other way of eating. Now, when I started my Ultimate Weight Loss program 5 years ago, and told people they had to eat vegetables for breakfast, I did not know that the scientific research would give me a reason why this was so effective for the people that were willing to do it. It turns out that the dark green leafy vegetables, the one that Dr. Esselstyn wants you to eat a fistful of 6 times a day, contain a compound called thylakoids, which have been proven to actually turn off your hunger switch, to make you not hungry, and to stop cravings for unhealthy foods such as the sugars and the flours. Now, here's another reason to eat non-starchy vegetables at 100 calories per pound. You just can't overeat on them. They're very, very filling. You know, the people around the world that have the lowest obesity rate are the Asians, and they have about a 3% obesity rate. And while depending on where they live, if they haven't been exposed to our diet, they may eat some small amounts of animal products. They're basically on a starch-based diet, white rice, by the way, and maybe eat minimal oils, and they generally don't eat nuts. They always eat vegetables, and they're a culture that just has vegetables in their dishes. When I was in Japan, for example, I was there as a comedian many years ago doing a television show, and I was at one of their finest hotels. They didn't know or care that I was vegan. What did they serve me in Japan every day for breakfast? They served me a miso soup with lots of vegetables. They served me rice, and they served me a salad. I have friends that are from China and say that pickled vegetables are part of their breakfast every day. And I have another girlfriend from Korea that says kimchi, which is made from vegetables, is part of her breakfast every day. Even in countries like Scandinavia, Denmark, and Finland, where they may eat herring or lox for breakfast with cream cheese on pumpernickel bread, vegetables are always part of their breakfast. Cucumbers, red onion, tomato, capers, things like that. So really, if you really want to take your health and your weight loss to the next level, you need to fall in love with vegetables. I recommend that people eat a minimum of 2 pounds a day, 1 pound cooked and 1 pound raw. I figured if as a lean person I can eat 4 pounds religiously every day, then you guys can eat 2. Now, if you eat all your vegetables raw, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But when you cook vegetables, for example, Brussels sprouts, which you can make with one of my recipes, where they're glazed with balsamic vinegar and Dijon mustard and roasted in the oven or your air fryer, a pound becomes a mere 2 cups of food that you can hold in your hand. If you take a pound of frozen spinach or kale and defrost it on your counter overnight and squeeze the water out, you're talking about a volume of food so small that it can fit in the palm of your hand. So I do my best to create recipes that will make vegetables delicious, but the truth is, starting out, you don't have to like it, you just have to do it, because the more you do it, the more you'll like it. It takes about 15 times to try a new food for it to become a preferred food. Those of you with children, the first time your kid turned their face at a food, did you just give up? Well, you're the same baby. Just keep trying the food. And we told you about a lot of wonderful things like Benson's Table Tasty and local spices and California balsamic vinegars that can make your steamed greens taste like a hot fudge sundae. You know, this idea of eating vegetables has gotten so popular that Conan O'Brien has said that for the first time since 2007, the FDA has actually approved a new device to treat obesity. This amazing breakthrough is called a vegetable, and that is the secret, guys. Although I do recommend, like Dr. McDougall and the others, a starch-based diet based on calories, the way to lose weight is with a full plate of vegetables at every single meal, including breakfast, but without oil and butter and cheese and bacon, of course. The only problem with when you eat so many vegetables is your doctor will say to stop, because she won't find anything wrong with you. Because as I mentioned, the food most corroborated with weight loss is the food most corroborated with health. You know, when people think about Alzheimer's prevention, they often think of blueberries that are often called brain berries. But the number one food linked to Alzheimer's prevention is greens. The same thing with heart disease. So the foods that will cause you to lose weight are also the foods that will cause you to gain health. You can train your body to crave healthy food. It's possible. For someone who didn't eat anything healthy for 43 years, I'm telling you that what you eat today, you will crave tomorrow. No one has ever gotten fat by eating too much kale, and that's true. I want to introduce you to a concept you may have heard of called the BMR or the BMI, the RMR or the BMR, the resting metabolic rate or the basal metabolic rate. For every 10 pounds of body weight, you need about 10 calories for every pound of body weight. So if you weighed 150 pounds, for example, you would need at least 1,500 calories a day just to beat your heart and breathe your lungs. So imagine you sprained your ankle, you're laying in bed all day at 150 pounds, you still need 1,500 calories just for your bodily functions. How many people here can eat 15 pounds of vegetables a day? Now, I mentioned to you that I'm eating consistently 3, sometimes 4, and I'm eating all day. So the idea is if you eat lower calorically dense food like vegetables, you dilute the overall caloric density of the higher calorie foods you're choosing to eat. And this causes you to feel full sooner on fewer calories. But we want you to eat your food, not juice or blended, for ultimate weight loss, and we'll explain why in just a moment. But first, we're going to move on to the next food group. And again, these are food groups, and this is actually 200 to 300 calories a pound, but we're rounding up, and that food group is fruit. Now, I mentioned to you just a moment ago that there's actually 6 fruits that are only 67 calories per pound, and truthfully, most fruits, the lower glycemic fruits like the berries and the apples, are about 200 calories per pound. But to make way for some of the more calorically dense fruits like bananas, which are about 400 calories per pound, and plantains, and some of the tropical fruits, we're going to just say that on average, fruit is 300 calories per pound. Now, you heard from Dr. Garth Davis that it's absolutely silly to think that fruit is the reason people are overweight. He's a gastric bypass surgeon who's done thousands of operations, and he says it's never because somebody was eating too many apples. You do not have to worry about fruit. Even if you're diabetic, fruit is not what's causing people to gain weight. Fruit Loops, yes. Fruit, no. Now, if you look at this picture, if you know anything about my story, all I ate was sugar and flour and oil, dessert for the first 43 years of my life. I could never eat fruit because it never tasted sweet enough to me. If all there was were strawberries, I had to pour sugar on it just to get it to be edible. But now when I look at fruit, when I eat it, nature's candy, I find that most of it is actually too sweet for me to eat now. It's incredible how your taste buds can neuro adapt and change. We want you to get your sweetness in life from the fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the fruit. You don't need sugar. Fruit is incredibly sweet, especially when you stop eating high-fat, high-calorie foods. But here's why we want you to eat your food whole instead of juiced and blended. You know, Dr. Esselstyn says that we already have the 32 of the best juicers and blenders, and that means our teeth. He said we didn't exit our mother's wombs clutching the sharp blades of a Vitamix. So here's the thing. Your stomachs are about the size of a cantaloupe. They hold about a liter of food, which is about 4.22 cups. These 2 glass jars are exactly the same size. On the left, we have 500 calories per apple of apples. Apples are about 200 calories a pound. So I went to the store and I weighed and measured 2.5 pounds of apples, and in this case, with this size, I got about 6 apples. Now, how many people could honestly eat 6 apples? I know there's probably a few of you that say you can, but most people, after about 2.5, you're going to feel pretty full from all the fiber and the water. But you take those same 500 calories per apples and you juice them, and you're left with about 3 cups of juice that is very, very easy to consume. By the way, liquid calories, whether they come from juices, smoothies, alcohol, designer coffee drinks, liquid calories are never favorable for weight loss because they just lack the satiety mechanisms. There's no fiber in them. So here's the thing. What does the apples on the left have that the apple juice on the right is missing? Well, if you answered fiber and water, you're right, because that is probably the 2 most important components of food where weight loss is concerned. You see, fiber actually tricks the brain into thinking that you are full on fewer calories. And guess what? You can only find fiber in whole plant food. You can't find it in processed plant food or any processed food, and you certainly can't find fiber in animal products. And so the next secret to ultimate weight loss is to make sure that everything you eat not only comes from a whole plant, but has the fiber and water intact. Because fiber plus water creates bulk, that nice feeling of fullness. Imagine taking a sponge and dipping it in water and seeing it expand. Fiber plus water creates bulk, and bulk creates satiety. Imagine these glass jars were your stomach. You could see that if you look to the picture on the right of the apple juice, it barely fills your stomach, the liquid, and you just won't feel full. The other problem with juice, other than juicing, is an incredibly expensive way to get calories. Let me tell you, for people that say they can't afford eating this way, oh my God, juicing is the most expensive way to get your calories because you end up throwing away the most important part of the produce, the pulp. But think about it this way. When you have apple juice as opposed to apples and you drink it, what it does is because the fiber has been removed and the absorption in your intestine is not been slowed down by the mitigating fiber, your blood sugar gets raised much more quickly. Well, when your blood sugar is raised much more quickly, your insulin levels get also raised much more quickly. And insulin is this hormone that is responsible for turning the cells, storing fat into the cells. So what about green smoothies? I know they've become very popular, and they're not horrible food, by the way. Now, the glass jar on the right, this is not a green smoothie, this is applesauce, but it's the same idea. I took the 500 calories of apples, and I took that core out, and I put them in my Vitamix, and I got about 3 cups of applesauce. Now, imagine these were your stomachs. What do you think would cause you to feel more full if you could even eat 6 apples? Now, the fruit puree, which is the applesauce, of course, is going to be a little bit better than the apple juice because we didn't take anything out. The fiber and water are still intact. But the sharp blades of the Vitamix greatly reduces the bulk. It reduces the volume. And when that happens, it decreases satiety, and you will not feel, you will need to eat a lot more food to feel full. It still will raise your insulin and blood sugar more quickly, not as quickly as the juice, but much more quickly than the whole apples. And like Dr. Lyle said yesterday, this softening of food causes us to consume 12.5% more calories. To give you another example I got from Dr. Lyle, who was instrumental in helping me achieve my ultimate weight loss and the body of my dreams at the age of 52. When I went to see him as a patient in January of 2011 at the True North Health Center, weighing 165 pounds, I was not eating any sugar or oil or salt or flour. I couldn't figure out, how could I be so fat? I mean, I was eating an SOS-free diet. I was also having a green smoothie every single day for breakfast. And sure, it was a far cry healthier than my Coke Slurpee. I told him this, and he said he wanted me to do an experiment. And then when I got home, take all the ingredients that I was putting in my blender, which were very healthy, by the way. It's a recipe from my book Unprocessed called It's Easy Being Green Smoothie. It was a half a pound of spinach or kale, a cup of unsweetened almond milk, 2 cups of frozen berry, a frozen banana, and a tablespoon of flaxseed. It was about 375 or 400 calories. And he told me to put it in the blender, but before I pushed the button for blend, to now dump it into a bowl and try to eat it. Well, guess what happens when I try to eat the contents of my smoothie? I could only eat about half. I got full on fewer calories. You see, believe it or not, satiety actually begins with the eyes. And this is why the weighing and measuring programs are so difficult for people, because they see such small portions of food. They're getting less ounces in a day than I'm eating in a meal. I think it's something like 17 ounces of food per meal. They get something like 7 ounces of vegetables and 6 ounces of protein, and who knows, but it's something like 17 ounces of per meal. That's 54 ounces in a day. I'm eating more than that in every single meal. So satiety actually begins with the eyes. When we see large volumes of food, we expect to be satisfied. And satiety actually continues in the mouth through a digestive enzyme called amylase by chewing. And so when we drink our food in the form of smoothies or juices, we absorb 12.5% more calories than we would have if we would have eaten them in their whole food form. So chewing is very important to satiety. Now, what about dried fruit? Listen, it's not horrible. People that put some raisins on their oatmeal, I saw Toby do that just yesterday, as a matter of fact, but he's not overweight. But here's the problem, guys. Whole fruit like apples are 200 calories a pound. Dried fruit, like these dried apples shown on the right, or dates, are 1,300 calories per pound. They're more than 6 times as calorically dense. Now we see that the fiber is intact. But what happened when I took the 500 calories worth of apples and dehydrated? What happened is we removed the water. So we're decreasing satiety greatly. And it's very, very easy to overeat on dried fruit, because basically it's now sugar and we've taken all the water out. It's still healthier, in my opinion, than sugar, which is 1,800 calories a pound, but it is so much easier to eat and overeat on dried fruit than it is to eat on fruit in its whole natural form. So if you look at this next slide, all 4 incarnations of 500 calories per apples are being shown. We have the 6 apples, we have the apple juice, the apple sauce, which would be the same as if you made a green smoothie, and the dried apples. Imagine this was your stomach. What is going to fill you up more? If you answered the whole plant food, you are always correct. Whole plant food with fiber and water intact is one of the secrets to satiety, which is one of the secrets to ultimate weight loss, because fiber plus water creates bulk, and bulk is what creates satiety. Fiber, for example, is important to every single bodily process. It not only helps you feel full on fewer calories by tricking the brain into thinking it's full, but it binds to toxins and it flushes out waste materials. It binds to cholesterol. It is just, it's really, really one of the secrets is fiber. And if you take out the water, and if you take out the fiber, or you take out both, or if you're eating most of your calories from animal products and processed food, you are basically on a fiberless diet. So we'll move to the next group of foods. And remember, guys, we're not talking about individual foods. We're talking about food groups. And this food group is 400 to 600 calories per pound. Now, remember what Dr. Lyle said yesterday. If you review, I would recommend you review all of the speakers if you can, but there's a few especially that talk about this, like Dr. Lyle, who talked about that the problem that people are experiencing from being overweight isn't because they're eating too much food. It is because they're eating the wrong food of a high caloric density. And that as humans, we were designed to eat foods that ranges about 500 calories a pound, the foods that I'm showing in green. So the food group that is 400 to 600 calories a pound, these are the unrefined complex carbohydrates. This is what Dr. McDougall would call starch. Foods that are given a bad rap by so many people because they're not eating them in their whole unrefined form. They're adding things like oils and cheese and butter and bacon to them. You heard from Dr. Clapper, from Dr. Davis, from Dr. McDougall, from Dr. Shintani, from all the speakers that carbs do not make you fat. They do not cause diabetes. That is impossible. Dr. Davis talked about de novo lipogenesis, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. It is what you put on the carbs, which is generally fat, that makes people fat. So to break this category down further, at 400 calories per pound, and by the way, I'm rounding up because there are some starches that are as low as 325 or 365 calories per pound, but averaging at about 400 calories per pound, we have potatoes, sweet potatoes, and winter squashes, all the wonderful squashes like delicata, butternut, Hubbard, acorn, kabocha squash. At 500 calories per pound, we have all the whole grains, whether they contain gluten or not. Quinoa, teff, millet, amaranth, barley, oats, rice, corn would be a whole grain. And at 550 to 600 calories per pound, we have legumes, beans, split peas, and lentils. Now, I did not invent calorie density. As I mentioned, Dr. Rolls gets all the credit for being the human being that has done the most research into this field. But what I think I've done, because I'm somebody that actually was overweight and obese, was to understand it so that I can explain it to you in a way that I hope you'll understand. Before I learned PowerPoint, I used to give this lecture to every single client that would come to my apartment in Sherman Oaks for weight loss, and I would write everything out by hand on a large whiteboard, which I still have today. And sometimes I still have to do, believe it or not. Now, I was talking to this client, and after an hour, I had finished the lecture, and she looked at me very quizzically, scratching her head, and said, "What am I supposed to eat?" And out of frustration, I took the red Sharpie and drew a vertical red line, and I said, just eat to the left of the red line, which is why I have little bracelets that I wear and put on my water bottle that say eat to the left of the red line, because as research corroborates it, as Dr. Lyle had told you yesterday, and what they have done at the American Cancer Research Foundation, is that if we keep our average caloric density per day to 567 calories per pound, you cannot gain weight. Now, are there some people that have such horrible eating disorders that could not lose weight at a caloric density that low? A few. Dr. Lyle said he's seen very, very few in the tens of thousands of patients he's treated over the years. But almost every single person that eats to the left of the red line will lose weight down to a very comfortable, healthy weight. Now, one of the things I didn't mention when I was talking about fruits and vegetables is that there are people out there that are vegans that call themselves 80-10-10ers based on a dietary style of Dr. Doug Graham, or fruitarians or low-fat raw vegans. We happen to know one, our friend at Mastering Diabetes, Robbie Barbero, who eats only fruits and vegetables. Now, I'm not recommending you do that because I think starch is very, very important to satiety. But what I'm saying is the people that do eat that way, that it is absolutely impossible to be overweight or obese at a caloric density that low. These people that follow these lifestyles, they are the leanest people on the planet. And people that eat to the left of the red line are not obese and are very, very difficult to be overweight. And Dr. Lyle mentioned yesterday that our species evolved at a caloric density of about 500 calories per pound. Once again, as luck would have it, the foods to the left of the red line, the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, are not only the foods that will promote weight loss because they are the most calorically dense, but they are also the most nutrient dense, which is why Dr. Neil Barnard, the president and founder of PCRM, has put these 4 food groups on his PCRM power plate: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. You notice there's no nuts and seeds or anything else on his power plate. These are the foods that will help you experience ultimate weight loss. Just to give you some examples of these foods, these are all recipes from my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss. You can see it's plentiful, it's beautiful, it's delicious. Again, it's my bodacious beet salad, oven roasted ratatouille, chipotle bean burgers, millet salad, cauliflower bisque, the McDougall Goldhammer sweet potato risotto stack, cram muffins, oven roasted Brussels sprouts. This is a restaurant that's in Los Angeles and also, I believe, in Washington now called Sharky's. I don't recommend restaurant eating for ultimate weight loss. That's a whole nother lecture. But what I do recommend is that if you do go out to eat, talk to your restaurants about getting healthy choices on the menu like I did and like Howard Lyman did in his community of Ellingsworth, Washington. At Sharkey's restaurant, you can get what's known as an AJ bowl or plate. It is steamed broccoli and beans and brown rice that are cooked without oil. There is some minimal salt, little bit of pico de gallo and guacamole if you want, over a bed of greens, and you can also get it with corn tortillas. And so again, this is an example of a restaurant meal that could be left of the red line without oil. This is another restaurant meal example from a place called Sioux Plantation. In some parts of the country, it's called Sweet Tomatoes. You can have a huge salad with beans and peas and a balsamic dressing that they have, and a huge baked potato with salsa and chives and fruit for dessert. And that, my friends, was only my first serving. These pictures that are in these PowerPoint were slides or pictures that people took of me, never intending that I was going to be even talk like this, but people say, how can someone so small eat so much? Because I understand calorie density. I just got back from the Holistic Holiday at Sea cruise, and that would be an example of my food. You can see that 2/3 of my plate is non-starchy vegetables, steamed, raw, and then also a lot of starch. This was a picture taken at the McDougall program that I was visiting, and that was my first plate. The more I eat, the smaller I get, but I'm eating the right foods, which are the foods to the left. So let's take a look at what most Americans are eating, because clearly they're eating less than 10% of their calories to the left of the red line. Now, the first food to the right of the red line is in purple, which means it's a healthful food, but it's calorically dense. So I want you to be mindful of it if you're trying to lose weight. And that food is avocado. Now, avocado is a whole natural food, and if you're going to eat whole food fat, I certainly recommend it. It's a good source of monounsaturated fat. I totally would recommend that over any kind of processed oil. But the problem is caloric density. Now, one avocado can have as much as 300 calories and 30 grams of fat. And while I don't consider avocados or guacamole addictive the way I do sugar, flour, and alcohol or coffee, the problem is for many people like myself that identify with the label of food addict or food addict in recovery, some of these really calorically dense, high-fat, pleasurable foods like avocados and nut butters and even nuts and seeds are what we refer to as trigger foods, meaning that yes, they are healthy, but we cannot control the amount we eat. They cause us to exponentially eat more food, and it's more of the high-fat foods. It's not like we eat this and go, wow, I'm going to have some more carrots. Does anybody know what a serving of avocado is? Now, when I give this talk in person, a lot of people raise their hand and say 1, some say 2, some say a half, some say a quarter. But the truth is, a serving of avocado, according to the California Avocado Commission, which are the people that grow them and sell them, so ostensibly want you to eat as many as you can, a serving of an avocado is 1/5 of an avocado. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been able to take a creamy, luscious, ripe avocado, cut it into 5 segments, eat 1, and put 4 back. And if you can do that, God bless you, you do not need this lecture. So it's something to be mindful of. So the next category of foods, and again, these are food groups that I've lumped together, this is a caloric density of 1,200 to 1,800 calories per pound. And it is within this group that all the food addiction I see lies. This category is the refined complex carbohydrate. Now, carbs are good when they're unprocessed to the left of the red line. As a matter of fact, if you remember Dr. McDougall's talk about what healthy people ate throughout history, all successful populations have eaten at least 80% of their calories from complex carbohydrates. But refined carbohydrates are not health promoting, and even if they were, which they're not, none of the speakers recommended them, they are too calorically dense for people to eat in any measurable amount and not be overweight or obese. This is how I think of this category of foods, and I hope you will as well, especially if you have children or are thinking of having children. Now, dairy products are especially problematic because they're not only an animal product, but they're a processed food. And you remember from Dr. Barnard's talk about the casomorphines being highly addictive. He wrote a whole book about that called The Cheese Trap, that people actually are addicted to dairy products. Now let's look at the caloric density of these 4 different types of foods within this group. At 1,200 calories per pound, we have ice cream, whether it's vegan or not. At 1,400 to 1,500 calories per pound, we have bread and flour products. At 1,600 calories per pound, we have cheese. And at 1,800 calories per pound, we have sugar. Now, Americans eat over 150 pounds of sugar per person per year. Now, I haven't eaten any sugar since July 6, 2003, so somebody's eating my share. Excuse me one second, my voice is eating a beverage. I think I've talked more these last 9 days than I have in the last 9 years. So, now, it takes about 3 feet of sugar cane to make 1 teaspoon of sugar. I had a friend that grew up in Cuba, and her dad would cut her an inch piece. It would last her the whole month. How many of you could gnaw through 3 feet of sugar cane? But pretty easy to eat a teaspoon of sugar. You know, if Americans are eating over 150 pounds of sugar per person per year, that means most Americans are taking in 900 calories a day of something that isn't even a food. You know, beets are about 195 calories per pound. They're a whole natural food. Knock yourself out. But when you turn them into sugar, now they become 1,800 calories a pound. So when you process a food, it becomes calorically rich and nutrient poor. You know from some of the experts like Dr. Tarman that they've shown in MRI studies, Dr. Davis talked about this as well, brain scans, especially in people that are overweight and obese, that sugar lights up the same part of the brain as heroin and cocaine, and that it actually is more addictive than even heroin and cocaine. Yet many people start their day and their children's day with this highly addictive drug. Let's face it, most people, even if they still consume sugar, know that it's not a health food. But try to take bread and flour away from people and they think you're being sacrilegious. After all, bread is the staff of life. We break bread with our loved ones. But let's look at it from a health standpoint as well as a caloric density standpoint. Now, we know that whole grains are healthy. They're about 500 calories per pound, and they absorb water when we cook them, which makes them even more filling. As I mentioned before, our stomachs are about the size of a cantaloupe holding a liter of food. And I could easily eat 500 calories of brown rice. That's only about 2.5 cups. Actually, I did just the other day for dinner in my salad. But I take that same brown rice and I grind it into a grain or mill it into a flour to make a gluten-free bread or a vegan pastry or something. And now it takes 3 times as much to fill the same space in the tank. I would now need 1,500 calories of brown rice flour to feel the same fullness as I would from 500 calories of the brown rice that was cooked in the water. The other problem is this, is when you grind a grain, when you have a whole grain, you have what's called an intact grain. And when you grind the grain or cut it with a sharp blade, you now have what's known as a broken grain. And when you have a broken grain, you have increased its surface area. So when you ingest it, you have increased the absorption in your intestines. And when that happens, it raises the blood sugar more quickly, which in turn raises the insulin more quickly, which is the hormone responsible for driving fat into the cells. The other problem is that sugars and flours go through the exact same refining process as drugs and alcohol. And for those who are sensitive at all, are vulnerable to the effects of food addiction, sugars and flours, even, yes, whole grain ones or, quote, natural ones, have the same effect on our brain chemistry as these drugs. They light up our brains. They make it impossible for us to stop eating them. And even if you are somebody who can eat them without being, quote, addicted to them, let's face it, what we learned from Dr. Lyle, from our species' natural caloric density history, they're just too calorically dense. And the same with cheese at 1,600 calories a pound. If you are new to me or new to plant-based, I would really encourage you to either read Dr. Barnard's book, The Cheese Trap, or Dr. Campbell's book, The China Study, so that you could understand, even if you're only willing to make some changes, cutting out dairy would probably be the first and most important change you could make, because in addition to its high caloric density and being the highest source of saturated fat in our diet, it is the food most linked to ill health, even cancer. And this you can find in the movie Forks Over Knives, where it's talked about, and also in the book, The China Study. And it's addictive. So again, just the breakdown of these 4 food groups. The way I like people to look at this group is like this. Oops, sorry. I can't see my slides in advance. Just to show you, these are some jars that are 4-cup jars. And to show you what 400 calories per cheese looks like, I can't even fit, these are small potatoes. I can't even fit 400 potatoes into that jar. This is 400 calories of maple syrup. Again, I can't fit 400 calories of maple syrup into that jar. 400 calories of flour, can't even fit maybe, I don't know, what, 200 calories of potatoes maybe in those jars. I'd like you to think of this category like that. No one needs to be eating refined carbohydrates or dairy products. Even if you're insistent that you must eat animal products, nobody needs to eat dairy. The only place you should be getting your milk from is your mother's breast. Human beings are the only species that drink milk from another species or drink after maturity. And if I could wave a magic wand or just ask you to make one change, that would be what I would ask, is to please stop dairy. All food addiction groups agree with that as well, even ones that are not plant-based. That's a magnet that I have in a store that I sell, so just to help you get more encouragement to not do that. Okay, the next food group is 2,500 calories per pound, and this group always tops the list of the most craved foods when they ask people. Even men put this at the top of the list, but women, you all know what this food is, and that food is chocolate. You know, chocolate comes from the cacao bean, which is actually a seed. It was used in the ancient Aztec civilization as currency. And there are some marginal health benefits to cacao. It's actually higher in antioxidants than either red wine or green tea. But the problem with chocolate is usually the company it keeps, which is full fat dairy and a lot of sugar. Now, if somebody said they had to eat chocolate, what I would recommend is they would go and get one of those delicious chocolate balsamic vinegars from one of our sponsors, California, one of our contributors, California Balsamic, and drizzle it over strawberries. But let me talk a little bit about chocolate and talk about the part of food addiction that really is what I want to communicate to you more than anything else. And this is what I learned firsthand from Dr. Alan Goldhammer and Dr. Doug Lisle. First, I want to tell you about an experiment that they did with people that were self-professed chocoholics. This experiment had nothing to do with weight. They brought people into the research lab that said they were chocoholics, and they filled out questionnaires as to what they liked and how much they ate. And they allowed them access to an unlimited buffet of every kind of candy cake, cookie pie, and ice cream that they said was their favorite, and chocolate. But before they unleashed them on the buffet, they injected them with a drug called naloxone. Now, unless you happen to be a heroin addict or be in the health profession, you may not know what naloxone is, but it's a drug that's often administered in the emergency room if somebody were to present what could be a fatal heroin overdose. It blocks the blood-brain barrier, so if somebody were to take a potentially fatal overdose on heroin, that they would not die from it. Now, I'm not suggesting that those of you that are addicted to chocolate do this, because there's a lot of harm into taking this drug if you don't need it for that reason. But the point is in this experiment, all these chocoholics that were injected with naloxone walked up to the buffet and they looked for whatever their favorite piece of chocolate was, and they took a bite and they walked away, and they had no more desire to eat any more chocolate. So what happened? Did the chocolate cease to become delicious and creamy and luscious and excellent tasting? Or was something happening in their brain that blocked the ability to experience the pleasure from the chocolate? Now, if you understand that we live in a world now that most people no longer eat for hunger and survival, we eat for myriad other reasons: anger, loneliness, boredom, stress, depression, anxiety. We eat for almost every reason other than hunger. We eat to celebrate. We eat to medicate. What you may understand is that people eat for a lot of different reasons, and that all eating stimulates the production of this neurotransmitter in the brain that is called dopamine. This is like the pleasure chemical. If you watch the movie Forks Over Knives, you heard Dr. Lisle said that food and sex are the two most rewarding behaviors of all species, and we're rewarded with dopamine from them. And all eating, even lowly kale, even lowly plain steamed kale at 100 calories per pound, all eating stimulates the production of dopamine in the brain. But the more calorically concentrated the dopamine, and a lot of the speakers talked about this, but maybe you weren't looking at this slide and visualizing it and seeing it this way. the more calorically concentrated the calories, the more dopamine is released. And so, like Dr. Goldhammer said, we have become a nation of addicts that are addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain and addicted to the chemicals of sugar, oil, and salt. So, if you eat only foods to the left of the red line for a period of time, you will learn to get just as much pleasure from them, but it doesn't happen immediately. There needs to be some time to neuroadapt. Now, also realize that this food addiction concept, this idea exists on a continuum, with some people being more or less vulnerable and being more or less vulnerable during different times of their life. For example, if you just did a 10-day meditation retreat, they could probably wheel the pastry cart by you and you could resist. But if you just got into a car accident, or your boss yelled at you, or you got fired, or your dog died, it would be a lot harder to resist a lot of these temptations, which is why having a clean environment is so important. A lot of people have addiction in their family. They have family members or their ancestors had things like drug addiction or alcohol addiction, gambling, shopping addiction. So a lot of people have what's known as the gene for addiction. There's many of them. The DRD2 is perhaps the most common one that people talk about. But a lot of people already have addiction in their family, which makes them more prone to wanting to use these foods to get this blast of dopamine. Most people aren't doing other things like having regular sex or exercise to get their brain flooded with these neurotransmitters to feel good. Some people are born with what's called low D2 receptivity, which means they produce less dopamine in the brain. And if you remember the lecture from Dr. Tarman, you actually burn out your ability to experience the pleasure from this dopamine when you are addicted or habituated to these foods. So this is a very in-depth process, but what I just want to explain to you, that if you prefer these foods at a high caloric density, there's nothing wrong with you. You know, when I give this lecture in person, a lot of people say to me, you know, Chef AJ, if I ate like you, because I've been vegan now for 42 years, they say, if I ate like you, I don't know if I'd live longer. I think it would just seem like it, because everybody knows that chocolate tastes better than kale. And so I ask people, I said, who will bet me $100 that the reason you like chocolate better than kale is because it tastes better? And nobody will take that bet, because instinctively you know that it's not the taste of the chocolate, because look at the experiment. The chocolate tasted the same. It's the ability of the foods to produce this pleasure, because when you're using foods for a drug-like effect, you're always going to seek the foods of the highest caloric density, which, and believe it or not, there's more. So understand there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. You have been genetically hardwired to prefer the most concentrated source of calories for survival. So whatever concentrated source of calorie is in your environment, even if it's not your favorite flavor, you will eat it. That is why, if you really want to be successful long term, cleaning up your environment is the first step. As Dr. Lyle says, we must work harder on our environment than we do ourselves. And you need to find ways to get pleasure out of life by doing things like having meaningful experiences with your community. For me, the way I get the most pleasure out of life, believe it or not, is I volunteer at a cancer center once a week, because when I do that, I realize I have no problems. No matter what happens to me, when I leave there, I know that I don't have cancer. And so this is another topic that we can discuss at length at another time. But the idea is as long as you're using food for things other than hunger and survival, you will always choose the most concentrated source of calories. It's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. And as Dr. Gould says, until you learn to be an adult and manage your stress, you will probably not be able to manage your weight long term. Okay, so now we're going to show you some calorie density comparisons. Right here, this isn't even 400 calories of M&Ms with peanuts. This is 500. This is the little, and this is just the one bag like they sold at the movies. You know, Toby and I were at Trader Joe's the other day, and I wish I had time to have put this in my PowerPoint, but we were at the register and we bought this bag of M&Ms with peanuts for 99 cents. And it was 2.5 ounces, and it was really tiny. It was smaller than the palm of my hand, and it had more calories than a pound of potatoes. It was insane. I mean, when you really understand calorie density, if you're somebody like me that likes to eat, let me tell you guys, this is the ticket. Okay, so that was how much chocolate you get versus you can get way, way more potatoes. And I'll promise you, potatoes are very, very, very pleasurable. So the next category of foods is nuts, seeds, nut butters, and tahinis. And again, I never have said that these foods were unhealthy, ever. They are healthful foods. But I have worked with several thousand people now in person for the last 10 years. And these are foods that people that suffer from food addiction can often have trouble moderating their use of. Because, like avocado, they are just so delicious, and so they produce so much more dopamine. So here's the thing. What I recommend is that if you're really worried about not having something that's in these foods, like specifically it's your omega-3 fatty acids, and Dr. Carney talked in length about the difference between the omega-6 and the omega-3, and by the way, there is a blood test that you can take. It's very affordable. You don't want to do the finger stick one through the mail. You want to actually have your doctor order the venipuncture one. You can test before you do anything. You don't have to believe me. You can test the amount of fatty acids in your blood. It's called the Essential Fatty Acid Profile. Insurance should pay for it, especially if your doctor says you need it. And it tests the amount of omega-3, omega-6, ELA, EPA, DHA, your ratio, your conversion in your blood. So I have done this blood test every year for the last 10 years. And my blood tests now are higher and better than when I was eating nuts 7 years ago. But I eat a lot of greens, like Dr. Carney says, and Dr. Esselstyn. Many people aren't willing to eat them. And by the way, I just received a note from Tech Support, aka Toby, my partner, that we did not eat the M&Ms. We are going to use them to show at some point. We did not. Plus the fact that they're dairy, we wouldn't have eaten them because we're ethical vegans as well. But with nuts and seeds, if you're really worried that there's something in there that you require for health, then why not do what Dr. Esselstyn suggests and have a tablespoon of ground flax seeds or chia seeds every day on your oatmeal or your salad. And seeds are actually healthier than nuts anyway. They're higher in these essential omega-3 fatty acids. Again, I would have you understand that if you have fat on your body, you're not going to become fatty acid deficient, especially in 30 days, which is what I recommend you do as an experiment. You know, I could not lose any weight eating any amount of nuts or seeds. I just couldn't. I'm not making this up. I tried for a year to measure out my 1 ounce of walnuts a day, and I could not lose weight. You want to know why? Then please re-listen to the lecture from Dr. Rosanna Alviera, who explained perfectly the genetics of obesity and how people can vary in this APOE gene and how much fat they can eat and eat fat. In general, men can eat a lot of fat and not be overweight or even lose weight. And a lot of the people that are telling you that you must eat nuts have never been overweight. They've never been on a diet. They've never suffered from food addiction. If you can include them and lose weight and be happy with your weight and not binge on them, please do so. I've never said not to. But what harm is there doing a 21-day experiment, omitting them just to see if you can jumpstart your weight loss? I can't imagine anybody saying that would be unsafe. I mean, my goodness, people like even Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Campbell fast at the True North Health Center for 40 days. If healthy people can fast for 40 days, you could probably go 21 days without eating nuts, seeds, and avocado, especially if you have fat on your body. But don't believe me, get the blood test and experiment for yourself. Now, I can't resist nuts. I mean, I cannot have them in my house. You know, there's a saying, one drink, one drunk in AA. Well, with me, one nut, 1 pound, because that's how addictive they are to me. And that is why many food addiction programs, even the ones that are not vegan, do not allow them because of that almost psychoactive effect. But let's look at it in terms of caloric density. I could have 400 calories of walnuts right there, 40 grams, doesn't even fill my stomach at all. Or I could have 200 calories of potatoes and be completely full. Now, the other problem with nut butters is just like when we process any food, we reduce the volume. So nut butters are even worse for weight loss and overeating and triggering people that are susceptible to that than even eating the whole nut. And I think peanut butter should be classified as an addictive substance for me. But that's what happens. I mean, you know, you could have 400 calories of peanut butter that maybe would cover, I don't know, 3 or 4 celery stalks or 1 slice of bread, or look at how many potatoes you can have and more. Now, I want to put something in perspective here. At the True North Health Center, where I've had the privilege to be a guest chef and lecturer for the last 8 years, they allow nuts and they allow dried fruit, but in very minimal amounts and only during usually this program called the Holiday Extravaganza. So on New Year's Eve, I make pecan pie from the recipe that you get if you got the digital package or the transformation package from my Date with Dessert cookbook. I make what's called the world's healthiest pecan pie with just 2 ingredients, pecans and dates. The photo on the left is 1/12 of the pie, which is the size serving we served to everybody New Year's Eve at True North. This pie, which from my mouth, the way I eat, was about 8 bites of food, was almost 700 calories and 57 grams of fat. Now, the picture on the left is something that I would eat on a normal day for lunch. It's a roasted Hannah yam that weighed 2 pounds before cooking, so about 1.5 pounds after cooking, and 4 artichokes. What do you think is going to fill you up more? These 2 things, 2 plates of food, have roughly the same amount of calories. What do you think is going to fill you up more? We're going to talk a little bit about the truth about fat and whether or not it's satiating. Well, let's talk about it now, because we learned from Dr. Terry Shintani that fat isn't satiating, that people say it's satiating because of the high caloric density. So if you have a mere tablespoon of oil of 120 calories, which you're getting if you go to a restaurant just from the residual oil on the cookware, well, that's already almost twice as many calories as an apple. So you say it's more filling because you're eating more calories. The truth is, if you look at the satiety index that was done by Dr. Susanna Holt, fat is actually the least satiating of all 3 macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So what is the most satiating? Well, if you guessed potato, you would be right. And if you want to feel full and lose weight on fewer calories, you've got to eat satiating food. And dried fruit and nuts are not satiating. So that's a picture of me on the left that was taken in 2011. That's the shoulder of Dr. Colin Campbell. I swear to God it is, but that's just me. I had gone 1 year lowering my nut intake to a weighted measured 1 ounce a day, and the scale did not budge. And then I decided to take the advice of Dr. Lyle and do an experiment and go 30 days without nuts, and the weight literally melted off. And I started eating a food that has been vilified as being not healthy and not contributing to weight loss. Now let's talk about that for a minute. If potatoes were not healthy, then how have they done so many studies throughout human history showing the opposite? If you were to Google KON potato study, this study was done with a young, healthy, athletic couple that ate nothing but white potatoes for a year. Because they were athletes, they actually had to add oil to get enough calories. And at the end of 1 year, they had no nutritional deficiencies. There was another study done by Chris Voigt, the head of the Washington Potato Commission, who was very upset when the U.S. government said people could no longer use food stamps to buy potatoes, but they could use it to buy Kool-Aid and macaroni and cheese. So he went on an all-potato diet for 60 days. He actually shared his research at one of the McDougall Advanced Study weekends. Now, he was by no means vegan, and he was probably using things like oil and cheese and animal products, but he still, in that 60 days of eating only potatoes, lowered all of his markers like triglycerides, blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes markers, all of which he had, by the way, and he got healthy. I believe his website is 20 potatoes a day. And what about our good friend Andrew Spudfit Taylor, who suffered from food addiction and depression and ate nothing but potatoes for a year and lost 120 pounds and once again had 0 nutritional deficiencies. Carbs don't make you fat. It's what you put on the carbs that make you fat, and eating carbs with fat that make you fat. Now, this is how you know you're eating too many nuts. If you look like Curly, then I think it's time to back down a little bit, or just do an experiment. Now, I had mentioned that there is a 40-fold difference in the caloric density of food. It ranges from 100 calories per pound to 4,000. Now, I don't even think this really is a food, but some people do, and that's oil. All oil. Yes, even cold pressed, first pressed, extra pressed virgin olive oil by the Pope in Italy. Oil is oil. Now, again, I'm not going to go into all the deleterious effects on oil here because almost all of our speakers did. If you really want to know more why oil is so deleterious to your health, once again, please listen to Dr. Esselstyn's talk or read his book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, or just watch Forks Over Knives where you can see the graphic of the blood flow, what happens when you eat oil. Oil is atherogenic, diabetogenic, and obesogenic, which means it promotes heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. But even if oil were healthy, which I do not believe by any stretch of the imagination, if you're going to eat fat, you eat the whole food fats, nuts, seeds, and avocados. It is too calorically dense for anyone to really eat and not be overweight, unless they want to weigh and measure their food. Yes, there are people that do include it, but they're eating very, very small portions of food. You know, a lot of people think that coconut oil is the answer now, but coconut oil is even worse than olive oil because it's 92% saturated fat. It's even higher in saturated fat than lard. And when people say things like the coconut oil miracle, antimicrobial, medium chain fatty acid, the miracle is that people actually buy that the companies benefit, that people buy it and believe that that is good for your arteries or good for your health. The fat you eat is the fat you'll wear, and we'll talk a little bit more about that further. You know, it takes about 41 olives to make a mere tablespoon of olive oil. And how many people could really eat 41 olives? Olives are about 500 calories per pound. It takes 16 ears of corn to make 1 tablespoon of corn oil. Can anybody here honestly tell me they can eat 16 ears of corn? I tried once. After 3, I was almost throwing up. I was so full. Again, when you process a food, you make calorie rich and nutrient poor. Whether it's olives into olive oil or beets into sugar, if there was anything truly healthful that you needed, or coconut into coconut oil, if there was anything in the processed oil that you needed, wouldn't it be in the whole food from which it came? So if you're going to eat fat, eat it in its whole food form. Eat the nuts, the seeds, the olive, the avocado, but don't eat the oil. Please don't eat the oil. I don't know how anybody can lose weight eating oil unless they're on one of those weighing and measuring programs and eating the 17 ounces of food a day, but which I would starve. I would eat my hand. Now, here's the other problem with oil. Oil slips under the radar undetected by your mechanisms of satiety, your stretch, nutrient, and calorie receptors. We'll talk about that in a minute, but first, just to show you, 400 calories of oil, that's your stomach. You can barely even see it in the jar. But 200 calories of potatoes, boy, you're going to feel full and happy. This is the slide I want to talk about now. So, this is your stomach on oil, on animal products, and on all the foods to the left of the red line. They have done studies having people eat a restaurant meal and making the same meal at home. So for example, I could make a meal for about 500 calories at home of a gluten-free brown rice pasta with an oil-free marinara sauce and a big serving of vegetables. I can make this pasta primavera at home, and I've made it for my husband, and it's a huge plate of food for 500 calories. Or I could make it like it was in the restaurant that I used to work at, where they would take about a cup of oil in the marinara sauce, where they would put oil in the water where they boiled the pasta, where they would pour more oil on the pasta once they took it out, and they would pour more oil or put butter on the vegetables. So for the same amount of food, for the same size serving of food in a restaurant, it would be 1,000 calories. Well, they've done studies with people, and they found that that extra 500 calories, when it came for fat, was undetected by the mechanisms of satiation. In other words, people could eat 500 calories from fat and oil and not feel any fuller. And that is why it is so deleterious for weight loss, because it has no fiber, it has no water. The same with animal products. Look, it fills the second stomach up a little bit more, but again, with no fiber and no animal products, the only way you are going to feel full on oils, processed food, or animal products is to overeat on calories. But if you eat the food to the left of the red line 2, 3, 4, even 5 times a day, depending on your activity and caloric needs, you just cannot be overweight because you would be too full. So let's go into this a little bit more. And this is one of my favorite parts of the presentation because they always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And this is what got me to understand calorie density were the photos in Dr. Rolls' book. So I have many wonderful slides to share with you. But first, as Dr. McDougall said in his wonderful presentation, and he's been saying for 40 years, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And this was corroborated by many of our speakers like Dr. Oliveira and Dr. Davis, who talked about something called de novo lipogenesis. You see, as human beings, we are very lucky that we cannot convert protein and carbohydrates into fat. That is something that pigs can do naturally. It is called de novo lipogenesis. We cannot do it except in an extraordinary situation where we're being force-fed tens and thousands of calories. We just can't do it. It takes only 3% of the calories in the dietary fat for it to be stored as body fat. if you could convert protein and carbohydrates to fat, which you can't, it would take at least 30% of the calories to do that. The good news is if you're somebody that is an emotional eater or a food addict and does not want to deal with why you are doing this behavior, you could ostensibly overeat to the left of the red line and still lose weight. Because when you overeat an extra sweet potato or an extra serving of rice or a couple more bananas, what happens is those extra calories do not get stored as heat if they're from carbohydrates. They get stored invisibly in the muscles or liver as glycogen. They get released through the fidget factor or through the top of the head as heat. We didn't talk much about alcohol other than saying that liquid calories are never going to be favorable for weight loss, but you heard from the other speakers why why alcohol is so deleterious to your health, but even more so for weight loss, because look at it. It's almost twice as calorically dense. It's almost as calorically dense as fat. So I look at alcohol the same way I look at oil. The other problem with alcohol is, well, first of all, from a health standpoint, we learned that the World Health Organization will no longer recommend any amount of alcohol is safe, and that according to Dr. Campbell, it can create cancer in any part of the body it touches. But the other problem is alcohol is a depressant. It slows your metabolism. And when you have to detoxify from alcohol, you're not going to be burning the fat in your butt that you're trying to get rid of, because your body has to stop everything to take care of that alcohol, just to detoxify it and run it through the liver. That's why they call being drunk intoxicated, because it's toxic. Alcohol is not a food. It is a toxic drug, and it is definitely not friendly to weight loss. When people drink alcohol, they generally don't walk up to the bartender and say, "Give me the steamed kale." They say, "Give me the fried whatever." So I'm sorry to tell you this, but after working with almost 3,000 people now, primarily women, I have yet to meet a woman who could get down to her slim ideal weight and maintain it, including alcohol. But fat and oil is even worse. Now, these are not calorie comparisons. These are fat comparisons, because you have to remember that fat is just not as filling. So it takes up less space in your stomach. For the same amount of fat in one potato chip, you could have 40 baby carrots. For the same amount of fat in one cracker topped with a traditional sour cream dip, you could have an entire huge tray of crudité with a fat-free bean dip. For the same amount of fat in 1 tablespoon of ranch dressing, you could have 10 pounds of cherry tomatoes, and if you roast them, they taste like candy. For the same amount of fat in 1 chocolate chip, you could have 5 pounds of grapes. Now, the sandwich on the bottom right is from a restaurant characterized by Golden Arches. And remember how Dr. Deal said, the more you eat at the Golden Arches, the sooner you reach the pearly gates. I've often said, if you want $1 million figure, you have to stop eating off the dollar menu. That breakfast sandwich has more than 25 grams of fat. 10 pounds of fruit salad has only trace grams of fat. A fun-sized bag of M&Ms has the same amount of fat as 14 apples. A huge bowl of vegan chili, or you could have 2 bites of a piece of pizza. 2 tablespoons of guacamole has 8 grams of fat. A huge bowl of salsa has no fat. You know, when I was working at the True North Health Center one year for 5 weeks, they serve a low-fat diet. You can get a little bit of nuts and seeds on the side. They have this little food scale for you to measure out your ounce if you can include them. But they don't serve very much fat there. But once a month, they serve avocado in the form of guacamole to put on our roasted potatoes. They also have 11-inch dinner plates at True North, which is bigger than most dinner plates at home, because Dr. Goldhammer is encouraging you to have large salads at all 3 meals, or like Dr. Gordon says, a salad every day the size of your head, or perhaps 3 times a day. So in 35 days there, one day they served guacamole, and people were filling half of their 11-inch dinner plates with guacamole. And Dr. Goldhammer said, "Does anybody know what a serving of guacamole is?" And no one raised their hand. He said, "Well, I just wanted you to know it's 2 tablespoons. So I raised my hand and I said, "Do you mean per chip?" And he said, "No, per day." And I didn't believe him. So when I went home, I went to Trader Joe's and I looked on a box of commercial guacamole, and sure enough, it said a serving of guacamole is 2 tablespoons. Again, if you're somebody that can eat 2 tablespoons, you probably don't need this lecture or my services. But most of us that have been overweight, we just can't. And you can eat as much salsa as you want. And guys, there's fat in everything. There's trace amounts of fat in fruit. Greens have about 3% of their calories from fat. Oats have almost 20% of their calories from fat, just like there's never been a documented case of protein deficiency on a whole food plant-based diet. There's never been a documented case of fatty acid deficiency, according to any of our speakers. And if you have fat on your body, you've got plenty. You could have the world's smallest hot fudge sundae or a huge bowl of fruit sorbet made in your Yonana's, Vitamix, Champion Juicer, or Blendtec. If you have a huge salad, you can have as much as you want with a balsamic dressing, but put on just a little bit of feta cheese and now it's 7 grams of fat. You could have 1 donut or 71 oranges. Homer Simpson did not like this slide. You could have 1 M&M with peanut or 9 jumbo strawberries. And hey, if you really need that chocolate flavor, just drizzle some chocolate balsamic over your strawberries. You could have 1 chocolate truffle or 26 oranges for the same amount of fat. You could have 1 peanut or 3 cups of air pop popcorn. Now keep in mind that I do not recommend air pop popcorn for weight loss or people that suffer from food addiction. Anyone that suffers from food addiction should never eat with their hands. Hand-to-mouth food can trigger that part of the brain that remembers and binges, and it can signal that to trigger overeating. So if you absolutely have to eat air pop popcorn or nuts, you eat them with chopsticks. That's what John Pierre would recommend you do. But air pop popcorn, first of all, snacking is never going to be favorable for weight loss unless perhaps it's non-starchy vegetables. But air pop popcorn is 1,800 calories per pound. It's the same caloric density as dry cereals and pretzels and sugar. Corn is only 500 calories per pound. Air pop popcorn has the water removed, and anytime you remove water, you increase your ability to overeat on it. So do not recommend hand-to-mouth foods in general and air pop popcorn specifically for people wanting to experience weight loss. Dr. Goldhammer says this is what you eat if you're trying to gain weight. 2 traditional French fries or 2 huge baked potatoes. But if you get yourself an air fryer or one of those Crispies trays, you can eat delicious French fries in every meal every day. I know I do. So just to summarize, the foods to the left of the red line, the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, the foods that are in green on my calorie density charts, these are whole foods. They're found in nature and contains vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, and micronutrients. They also contain fiber and water. And remember, fiber and water create bulk, and bulk is what creates satiety. They're the foods lowest in caloric density, and they're also the foods in highest in nutrient density. The foods to the right of the red line, in red, these are processed foods. These are not found in nature. They contain few to no micronutrients and little to no fiber and water, and they do not contribute to satiety, and they certainly don't contribute to health or weight loss. The foods in purple, these are healthful foods, but they are very, very calorically dense, and in my experience, are best included in small amounts after weight loss is achieved. So let's talk about whether or not this works. I mentioned I lost all my photos in the earthquake, but that pair of shorts on the bottom left, I do have those, and I used to fit into those. So I'll just go through quickly people that have done this program and showed you that it works. We'll just go quickly through these slides. Oh, can you stop there for a minute? I don't know if you can go back to that. Well, that's okay. Keep going to these people that have been kind enough to send their picture. Many of you are watching the summit. We'll just keep going quickly. And there might be one that I might want to stop on. Even men, it works for men. Look at how beautiful and younger they look.